The briefing room was cold. Not the kind of cold that came from a broken heating unit, the kind that came from grey stone walls and people who had been doing this job for too long to bother pretending otherwise. 5 soldiers stood in a single straight line in front of the central table. Their armor was dark and polished, and the overhead lights reflected off the surface in small white squares that shifted across the ceiling whenever someone moved. They had been standing there for 11 minutes. No one had told them to stand at ease. Commander Aranvel walked in last, the way commanders always do, as if time is a resource that belongs specifically to them, and he set a flat metal folder on the table with a short deliberate sound and looked at the 5 soldiers the way a person looks at equipment before a job, checking that nothing is cracked. 1 prisoner, he said. He opened the folder. Cell block Ven 9, sublevel 4, human female, designation Solis, Marin, age 38, captured 47 days ago in the outer corridor systems during what appeared to be a solo survey operation. She was found alone when the capture team arrived, which was unusual, and was noted in the field report, and then not followed up on, which is part of why we are standing in this room today. The youngest soldier in the line was named Velsarin, 22 years old, assigned to this unit 8 months ago, and by a significant distance the best psychological extraction specialist the Keth had trained in the last decade. He carried a small notepad in his left hand and wrote things in it the way some people breathe, continuously, without thinking about it. He wrote, "Found alone, unusual, not followed up." He underlined "not followed up" and moved to the next line. The commander turned a page. The dossier was long, compiled across 6 different departments over 47 days, every department flagging different items as significant, and somehow every department arriving at the same items in the end. Her pain tolerance numbers were printed in a table on page 3 with a red border around them and the word anomalous written beside them in small letters, and below that someone from a different department had added recheck equipment, because the numbers had seemed impossible, and below that someone else had written equipment confirmed functional. Velsarin wrote, "Pain, anomalous, confirmed." She did not resist capture, the commander said. The team approached. She sat down on the floor of the corridor and extended both hands with the palms facing upward. The team recorded this as a standard submission response and the capture is smooth. It was not noted as significant that she appeared to have been waiting in that exact location for a specific period of time before they arrived. Second soldier Darasev, broad, experienced, not the kind of person who asked questions during briefings, asked, "How long had she been in the corridor?" "We do not know," the commander said. Darasev said nothing after that, but he stood slightly differently, his weight shifting forward in a way that was too small to be a posture change and too deliberate to be nothing. The commander turned another page. Her first medical scan had returned clean results across every category: average height, average weight, average bone density, no unusual biology, nothing in her physiology that the Varric medical systems did not already have indexed. She was, by all available measurement, a completely unremarkable human being. Except she had healed a processing bruise in 4 days that the medical department's own documentation said should have taken 9. And she had not shown a single measurable disruption in her sleep pattern across 47 days of solitary confinement. The medical department had flagged that second item 3 times in 3 separate documents because it was, in the words of their senior assessor, inconsistent with every recorded human psychological response to extended isolation that existed anywhere in the Varric archive. "Prisoners don't sleep like that," Ketherd said from the far end of the line. "No," the commander said. "They don't." He turned another page and did not explain further. On the wall to his left there was a photograph taken from the ceiling camera in cell Ven 9. The resolution was soft but more than clear enough. It showed a woman sitting on the edge of a narrow bunk with her back very straight and her hands resting open in her lap, looking directly up at the camera lens. Not at the ceiling. At the lens. Her expression was calm in a way that had no clean name, not the careful blankness of someone holding fear down, not the empty flatness of someone who had stopped engaging with their situation. Something more deliberate than either, something that looked, if Velsarin was being accurate about it, like a person sitting in a waiting room who fully expected to be called soon and was simply passing the time until that happened. He looked at the photograph for a moment. He wrote nothing. "Language," the commander said, and he set the folder down and stood straighter because this was the item that had caused the 6-department dossier to exist in the first place. She has been learning Varric standards since day 1. No materials were given, no instruction was provided. She was placed in an isolated cell with minimal guard contact and instructions for observation only. As of 4 days ago, her last recorded interaction with the guard rotation demonstrated functional vocabulary of Approximately 400 words with measurable improvement across every single 3-day period since capture. The room was quiet for a moment. 400 words, Velsarin said, not as a question but as something he was confirming to himself while he wrote it down carefully. From nothing, the commander said, in 47 days. Velsarin had spent 2 years studying linguistics before the Keth. He had worked alongside human translators in field conditions and he knew what those numbers meant. 400 functional words in 47 days with no teacher, no materials, no willing conversation partners meant you were using every available hour as a classroom. It meant you were not waiting for someone to come and help you. It meant you were building something on your own and you had been building it from the moment they closed the door. She talks to the guards. Kethforth asked. She talks near the guards, the commander said. They are instructed not to respond. Most of them follow that instruction. She continues regardless. What does she say to them? Velsarin asked. More of our language every day, the commander said. He picked up the folder again. The navigational key, the full coordinate sequence for the meridian route, was confirmed present in her memory during early assessment and has not been removed. We need it extracted without physical damage to the asset, meaning she needs to remain functional afterward, meaning you will conduct this professionally. 5 soldiers understood without damage. It meant, whatever you do in that cell, she has to be able to think clearly when you leave. 5 of you is more than sufficient for 1 unequipped human female, the commander said. Enter the cell, conduct the extraction, return with the full sequence. You will be done within the hour. He looked at each of them. Questions? Velsarin raised the hand with the notepad. You said it was unusual that she was found alone and that it was not followed up. What would the follow-up have been? Determining whether she chose to be in that corridor at that specific time, the commander said. And had she? Almost certainly yes, the commander said, and he said it without hesitation, which meant he had already thought about it and had not liked what he thought. The room was quiet. Velsarin looked at the photograph, the woman on the bunk, looking directly into the camera, and he noticed, because noticing things was his entire job, that in every surveillance photograph he had ever reviewed of a prisoner in isolation, the prisoner was looking at anything other than the camera, because knowing where the camera was meant you had been looking for it, and prisoners were not supposed to look for things. One final item, the commander said, standard intake question, day 1. Do you understand why you are here? Her response is the last page of the dossier. He read it without any change in his voice. Yes, do you? He set the folder on the table near the door. He walked out. The 5 soldiers stood in the cold room and did not speak for a moment. The photograph was still on the wall. The woman on the bunk, hands open, looking directly at a camera she should not have known was there, calm in a way that still had no name. Velsarin opened his notepad to the last thing he had written. He wrote the question under it. He stared at it. He had no answer yet. Marin Solis woke up on day 47 the same way she had woken up on every day before it, not gradually, not swimming up from sleep the way most people do, but all at once, completely, like a machine being switched on. 6 hours, no more, no less. She had decided that on day 3, when it had become clear that this cell was designed to take time away from her, no window, no clock, ceiling lights running at a flat constant hum that never changed between day and night, food delivered on a schedule she had not yet been able to fully map, and she had decided that if they were going to take her time, she would keep her own. 6 hours of sleep. She counted them in her head the way she had been trained to count them years ago in a field preparation course she had taken before her first contact zone assignment, tracking her own rest cycles by breath rate and body temperature without any external reference, and it had seemed like a strange skill at the time and had saved her in 4 different situations since. She rose from the bunk and began her circuit. 14 steps by 8 steps. She had measured the cell on day 1 by counting her own foot lengths and confirming the count 3 times, and in the corner of the floor near the door there was a slightly raised seam where 2 panels met that she used as a start and finish marker, and she walked the circuit 30 times at a steady pace, arm swinging, head up, breathing through her nose. Movement was not optional. She had watched, in previous assignments, what happened to people who stopped moving in small spaces. The body starts to believe the space is all there is, the world contracts to the size of the room, thinking becomes slow and circular and inward. She had watched it happen to people much tougher than she was, and she had no interest in letting it happen to her. After the circuit, she sat on the bunk and ran her vocabulary. This was her favorite part of the day. She closed her eyes and went through every Varic word she had collected in the last 3 days, sorting each one by category the way she used to sort field notes, commands in one group, location words in another, emotional or relational terms in a third group that she kept separate because those were the most useful and also the most delicate, and she wanted to handle them carefully. She had 412 words as of yesterday. She wanted 500 by the end of the week. The guards did not know they were teaching her. They followed their instructions well. They did not speak to her directly, did not respond when she spoke near them, kept their interactions with her limited to the mechanical necessities of the door and the food delivery, but they spoke to each other in the corridor outside, and they spoke to themselves the way people do when they think. No one is listening, and Marin had very good hearing and a great deal of patience, and she was always listening. She had built a partial profile on 11 different guards over 47 days. Shift patterns, walking rhythms, weight distribution, the specific sound each one's armor made when they moved. Keth armor had a slight resonance difference at the shoulder joint depending on the build of the person wearing it, and she had learned to distinguish individuals by that resonance alone even before the door opened. The quiet one on the overnight shift was her favorite, which was a strange thing to think about a guard, but accurate. This one moved differently from the others, careful and forward-weighted, like someone trained to cross ground without advertising themselves, and sometimes after the walk-by this guard would stand outside her door for a few minutes without moving, not checking anything, just standing. On day 6, or possibly day 7, she had not yet fully calibrated her internal clock at that point. She had heard this guard say something in the corridor that was not directed at anyone and not part of any visible task, just a handful of words in Varric Standard said quietly to the empty hallway. She had not known what they meant at the time. She had held them in her memory the way you hold a shell you find on a beach when you do not yet know what kind of creature made it, carefully, without pressure, waiting to understand. She knew what they meant now. It was a phrase from a Varric grief ritual, the kind of thing you say at the end of a loss, when the loss is old enough that you have stopped crying about it but not old enough that you have stopped feeling it, and she was saving it because she did not yet know who in that cell she would need to say it to, but she was confident she would know when the moment came. She was very good at that kind of knowing. It was the whole of her profession, stripped to its core, not the translation of words, which was the simple part, but the translation of the person behind the words, the reading of what someone needed to hear versus what they were capable of hearing versus what they were prepared to receive from a specific source in a specific moment. She had done it in 6 contact zones across 4 species, and it had worked every single time except once. She reached into her pocket and took out the bolt. It was small and slightly irregular, worked free from the underside of the bunk frame on day 3, and she rolled it between her fingers without looking at it the way some people click a pen, back and forth across a palm, thumb to ring finger, back again, and her hands were quiet and her mind was working. She was not building an escape plan. She had considered it and set it aside on day 4, not because escape was impossible, but because escape was not the right move. Escaping meant leaving, and leaving meant the people who had put her here still had everything they wanted and she had nothing she came for. And she had not spent 47 days in a cell with no clock and no window learning a language from scratch just to walk out the way she walked in. She was building something else. She was building the conditions for a conversation. The door made its single-click release sound. She had heard that sound dozens of times and it never failed to bring her attention forward completely. She looked up at the wall across from her and used her peripheral vision to read the doorway without signaling that she was doing it, a habit from fieldwork that she had never unlearned. 5 soldiers. She counted them in the half-second the door was opening. 5 distinct armor resonances, 5 distinct weight distributions in the floor, the youngest one on the right with something flat in his left hand. She sat still for 1 full breath. Then she set the bolt down on the bunk beside her knee, carefully, so that it was visible. She wanted them to see her set something down, because setting something down is a gesture of deliberate calm, and deliberate calm is its own kind of message, and she looked at all 5 of them directly. She looked at the youngest one first. Not because he was the least threatening, but because he was the one with the notepad, and the one with the notepad was the one who had been told his job was to pay attention, and the one whose job was to pay attention was the only one in the room whose attention was actually worth having. She said, in Varric Standard, using 412 collected words and 47 days of patience, and the particular tone she used when she wanted something to land without sounding like a challenge. I was wondering when they would send enough of you to feel safe about it. The youngest one's pen stopped moving. His eyes came up from the notepad and found her face. Good. She stood up. She was smaller than all 5 of them, shorter, lighter, less armored by a margin that, from the outside, would have looked almost funny if you did not know what you were actually looking at. She did not feel small. She had not felt small in a very long time, and the last time she had, The thing that had made her feel that way had been considerably more dangerous than 5 soldiers with a notepad and an extraction timeline. Keth Commander Aranvel had run 41 extraction operations over the course of his career, and in all 41 of them the first 30 seconds had been the same. Entry, visual assessment, establish physical control, begin the process, and the first 30 seconds of this. One were going to be the same as well, because 5 trained soldiers against 1 unequipped prisoner was not a scenario that required creativity. He gave the signal. Darasev and Keththird moved forward first. The woman did not move away from them. She turned very slightly to the left, which was not a fighting stance and not a retreat. It was an adjustment, the kind a person makes when they want to be able to see 2 things at once, and she looked at Darasev's face with an expression that was not fear and not defiance and was, if Aranvel had been forced to name it, something closer to recognition. Like she knew him already. Darasev got hold of her left arm. She let him. This was the first thing that was wrong. In 41 operations, the moment of physical contact was always the moment of maximum resistance. The body responds before the mind decides, every time. It is a documented consistent phenomenon across every species the Varric had run extractions on. But she did not resist, she did not tighten, she just turned her head slightly toward the arm he was holding and said something. She said it in Varric standard. She said, "Your right shoulder. You are favoring it. That happened recently." Darasev's grip loosened by a fraction. Not because he chose to loosen it. His hands loosened before he registered that they were loosening, the way a person flinches before. They hear the sound. Because she was correct, he had taken an impact to the right shoulder in training 4 days ago, and no one knew about it because he had not reported it, and she had seen it in the way he was standing from across the room before he touched her. Keththird arrived at her right side, and she did not look at him, but she said, still in Varric standard, still in the same tone she might use to read items off a list. "You are the one who stands outside this door. Overnight rotation. You think I don't hear you stop." Keththird stopped. He was not supposed to stop. He stopped anyway. Aranvel said, "Continue the operation." They continued. Darasev re-established his grip. Keththird took her right arm, and for approximately 4 seconds the operation was proceeding the way operations proceed. Controlled, forward-moving, professional, and then she spoke again and the 4 seconds ended. She spoke to Keththird. She used 7 words. Velsarin, standing at the back of the cell near the door with his notepad open, did not know all 7 words, but he knew 4 of them, and the 4 he knew were enough for him to understand that she was using a phrase from a Varric grief ritual, the kind spoken at the tail end of a long loss, the kind that means something close to, the thing you carry is real and it was real and you are not wrong to still be carrying it. Keththird released her arm. He did not move away from her. He just released her arm and stood there. Aranvel said his name. Keththird did not respond for a moment. Then he stepped back and retook his position and did not look at any of the others, and Aranvel decided to process whatever had just happened after the operation was complete. Kethfourth and Kethfifth moved in to replace the positions and the operation pushed forward, and the woman, still standing, still calm, still rolling absolutely nothing between her fingers because she had left the bolt on the bunk and Velsarin had been watching, and he thought this was deliberate. He thought she had put it down because she wanted her hands to be visibly empty for this conversation, turned her attention to Kethfourth and said, "How long have you been doing this job?" Kethfourth said nothing. "More than 10 years, she said. "I can tell from the way you move. You have done this so many times it lives in your body now. You don't think about it. That takes a long time to build." Kethfourth said nothing, but his eyes moved to Aranvel and back. "That is not an insult," she said. "That is a skill. It is the kind of skill that is hard to explain to someone who does not have it. You know what I mean." Kethfourth did not say that he knew what she meant. His posture said it for him. The operation had been running for 12 minutes. In 12 minutes they had not achieved physical containment of one small unequipped human woman, not because she was physically resisting them, but because every time one of them got close enough to establish control she said something accurate about that specific person, and the accuracy of it hit before the training could respond, the way a too bright light hits before you remember to close your eyes. Aranvel tried a different approach. He told them all to stop. He walked forward himself and stood in front of her and looked at her directly and said, in Varric standard, "We are not here to harm you. We are here to retrieve a specific piece of information. The faster you provide it, the faster this ends. This is the simplest possible situation." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "You are the one who read the dossier." He said nothing. "You are the one who called me an asset 3 times in the briefing and believed it less each time," she said. I know because it is in your voice. The word sits wrong in your mouth now. Aranvel had been on 41 operations. He had never felt the operation looking back at him before. The navigational key, he said, keeping his voice flat and professional because that was the training and the training was there for exactly this kind of moment. Provide it and we leave. No, she said. Just the one word. Easy and direct, no performance in it. Then we will take more time and more methods, he said. You can try more methods, she said. You will still be here in an hour, and the hour after that, and I will know more of your language at the end of it than I do right now. That is not a threat, that is just how I am built. Aranvel looked at his 5 soldiers. Velsarin had stopped writing in his notepad. He was just watching her now. Darasev had both arms at his sides and was looking at the floor near her feet with an expression that was not readable in any standard operational category. Keththird was still standing where he had stepped back to, still not looking at any of the others, his jaw set in a particular way that Aranvel recognized as the face of a person who had been found out about something they had been carrying alone and did not yet know what to do with being found. The operation was at minute 18. 4 of his 5 soldiers were no longer conducting an operation. They were standing in a small cell with a woman who had taken them apart with words in a language she had learned by listening through a door, and she had taken them apart without raising her voice or changing her expression, and she was sitting back down on the bunk now, reaching for the bolt, rolling it between her fingers again. Calm. Like this was the expected result. Like she had been waiting. 47 days for this exact hour. Aranvel was beginning to think that she had been. Velsarin was the youngest person in that cell, and he was the only one who had not yet been spoken to directly, and he had noticed this, and he had spent the last 8 minutes trying to decide whether it was because she had not gotten to him yet or because she was leaving him for last on purpose. He had decided it was on purpose. He was good at reading people. It was the thing he was best at in the world, the thing that had gotten him into the Keth Psychological Division at 20, the thing that made commanders ask for him by name when an extraction required finesse rather than force, and reading this woman was the most interesting and the most uncomfortable thing he had done in his career, because she was doing it back. Not pretending to, actually doing it, accurately, in real time, using a language she had taught herself through a closed door, reaching into each of his unit members with a precision that was not luck and was not performance and was the result of 47 days of the most focused kind of attention he had ever seen anyone apply to anything. The notepad was open in his hand. He had not written anything in it since minute 12. She looked at him. You are the one they sent because you listen, she said. He said nothing. Not because you are the strongest, she said. Not because you are the most experienced, because when someone says something you actually hear it. That is rarer than it sounds, and they know it. Velsarin kept his face neutral. I am here to conduct an extraction, he said. I know, she said. You are also the only one in this room who is still trying to do the job, which means you are either the most committed or the most afraid of what it means if you stop. He said, those are not the only 2 options. No, she agreed. They are not. She looked at him for a moment. What did they tell you about me? She asked. I read your dossier, he said. I know what is in my dossier, she said. I mean, what did they tell you before they sent you in here? What was the word they used for what I am? Asset, he said. Without thinking. The word came out and sat in the air between them, and he heard it the same way Aranvel's voice had sounded when he said it in the briefing. Slightly wrong, sitting at a slight angle to what it was supposed to describe. She did not react to it. I want to ask you something, she said. I am not here to answer your questions. I know. Ask anyway, she said, and then corrected herself. I mean, I know you are not here to answer questions. I am asking you to try anyway. He looked at her. She was sitting on the bunk with the bolt in her hand and her back straight, and she looked like someone who had all the time in the world and had decided to spend some of it on him. Specifically, and he was trained for this, he knew what deliberate rapport building looked like. He had done it himself in 17 extractions, and he could see every component of it in what she was doing. And it was still working on him. He did not know what to do with that. What is the Varick word? She said, slowly, making sure she had each word right, for a soldier who protects a thing instead of conquering it. Velsarin was quiet. There is one, she said. I have heard it. I do not know if I am using the shape of it correctly, but I have heard it used in a specific context, and I think I understand what it means. He knew the word she meant. It was old, older than the Keth, older than the current military structure, a word that came from a time when the distinction between protection and conquest had been considered worth naming separately. It was not used much now, It had a slightly formal weight to it that made it sound ceremonial in casual speech, but it existed. He said it. She repeated it back to him, the pronunciation slightly imprecise but recognizable, and then she said it a second time cleaner. Then she used it. She used it to describe him. He did not correct her. He did not correct her because she was not wrong. She was using the word the way it was meant to be used, and applying it to him in a way that was specific and accurate and not flattering in the way a manipulation flatters, not a compliment designed to lower his guard, just a true thing said plainly. And hearing a true thing said plainly about yourself is a different experience from being told what someone wants you to believe about yourself, and Velsaren had spent enough time in interrogation rooms to know the difference. He looked at his notepad. He looked at her. The meridian, he said. The bolt stopped moving between her fingers. It did not drop. She did not lose her grip. It simply stopped, held still in her palm, and the stillness of it was a different kind of information than anything she had said in the last 22 minutes. He had not planned to ask that question. He had planned to ask about the navigational key, 3 specific questions, sequenced carefully, designed to approach the information from an indirect angle the way you approach a fire from the side rather than head-on. And instead he had asked about the meridian, and he was not entirely sure why, except that it was the one thing in the dossier that had no data around it, just the name and the word incident and then a classification stamp. And the absence of data around something was always the shape of the thing that mattered most. She was quiet for a moment. 4 seconds, maybe 5. Then she told him. 1 sentence. Velsaren had run 17 extractions and he had heard people describe losses in those rooms. Losses of family members, of operations, of things they had built over years, and he had learned to process those descriptions professionally, to note them and move on, because his job was information and not comfort. This 1 sentence did not process professionally. He did not write it in the notepad. He did not write it because some things are not field notes and some things are not data, and some things are just a person telling you the specific shape of what they survived, and the only correct response to that is to stand still and hold it quietly for a moment. He stood still. He held it. Then he closed the notepad and put it in his chest pocket. The operation had been running for 24 minutes. He looked at Aranvel, who was watching him with an expression that was controlled and professional and slightly alarmed. He looked at the other 3, Darasev still looking at the floor, Keth III with his jaw set and his eyes on the wall, Keth IV and Keth V standing in positions that were technically still operational and were functionally just standing. He looked at the woman on the bunk. She was rolling the bolt between her fingers again. She was looking at him, not waiting for his decision. She already knew what his decision was. He could see that she already knew, the same way she had known which of them to say. The grief ritual words to and which shoulder Darasev was protecting and how long Keth III had been standing in the overnight corridor. She had known, and she had waited, and now she was simply watching the decision arrive at his hands and his feet and his mouth. He walked out of the cell. In the corridor, Aranvel came up behind him and said, "The key." Velsaren said, "She does not have it. The assessment was wrong. It was a false positive on the memory scan and the information is not there." He said it without hesitation. He said it looking directly at Aranvel. He was lying. He knew he was lying. He had never lied in an operational debrief in his career. He put his hand in his chest pocket and felt the edge of the notepad and walked down the corridor toward the lift and thought about the word she had used for him, the old word, the one for a soldier who protects instead of conquers, and he thought that he might keep it. He thought he might carry it the same way she had carried everything else. Quietly, with both hands, for a long time. The official report was filed at the end of the day. It was 11 pages long and written in the clean flat language that all Varric military reports were written in, the kind of language that had no room in it for doubt or hesitation or the particular feeling of standing in a small cell while a prisoner told you true things about yourself in your own language. The report called her the asset. It called the operation incomplete. It used the phrase anomalous psychological resistance 4 times across 3 different sections, which was the report's way of saying that something had happened in that cell that the standard operational framework did not have a category for, and that the writers of the report had decided to name without explaining because explanation would have required them to describe exactly what had happened, and none of the 5 soldiers who had been in the room gave consistent accounts of exactly what had happened. Darasev's debrief said, she was observant. Keth III's debrief said, she spoke accurately about personal matters she should not have had access to. Keth IV and Keth V's joint debrief said, She was non-compliant in ways that were difficult to categorize, and we recommend a review of current protocols for human psychological resistance. Aranvel's debrief said, the extraction failed due to factors that are detailed in the attached supplemental. I recommend a larger team and a revised approach. She is not a standard asset. That last sentence, she is not a standard asset, was the only sentence in any of the 5 debriefs that said the true thing directly, and it said it while still using the wrong word for her, and Aranvel knew it was the wrong word when. He wrote it, and he wrote it anyway because he did not have the right word and the report required a word, and the woman who walked into our facility on purpose, learned our language in 47 days, and then dismantled 5 trained psychological operatives with accurate observations and a grief ritual phrase was not a phrase that fit in the debrief format. Velsarin's debrief said, memory scan assessment was a false positive. The navigational key is not present. Recommend reassessment of initial scan methodology. His debrief was 4 sentences long. The review board flagged it as insufficiently detailed. He submitted no additional information. He was reassigned 3 days later to a desk posting in the communications division, which was standard protocol for operatives who returned from an operation with incomplete results, not a punishment, technically, just a recalibration, a step back before a step forward, and he accepted the reassignment without comment. He had begun, in his off hours, to study xenolinguistics. He had told no one this. He worked through it in his bunk during the hours before sleep with a borrowed text and no teacher, building vocabulary the same way she had built it, from the ground up, 1 word at a time, and it was slow and sometimes frustrating, and he understood, in a way that was now physical and not just intellectual, what it meant to decide. To learn something through a closed door with no one helping you. The review board met 8 days after the failed operation. The meeting was longer than usual. The question on the table was, what number of soldiers is sufficient for this particular asset? And the answer that emerged after 4 hours of discussion was 50 Keth-class operatives, full containment formation, complete communication blackout protocol, no one speaks to her, no one responds to anything she says, eye contact limited to operational necessity only. This last item, limit eye contact, had come from a specific line in Keth-third's debrief that said, she looks at you like she already knows you. This is disorienting. I am not able to account for the mechanism by which it is disorienting, but I am including it because it affected my performance and I believe it affected all of us. The review board had read this line several times. They had not been able to account for the mechanism either. They added it to the new briefing materials anyway, because something that affected the performance of 5 trained operatives was a thing worth noting even if the note did not explain the thing. One of the briefing slides for the 50-soldier operation read, do not engage in conversation. Do not respond to linguistic overtures. Maintain operational focus and minimize direct eye contact for extended periods. This slide existed because the previous operation had not had a slide like it and the previous operation had failed, and the working assumption of the review board was that if the 5 had known what was coming, they would have been better prepared. This assumption was the same kind of assumption that a person makes when they lose a game and decide that what they needed was better rules, without asking whether they were playing the right game. In Cell-Ven 9, Sublevel 4, Day 49 began the same way Day 47 had begun and Day 1 had begun. Marin Solis woke up all at once, completely, like a machine being switched on, and she sat up on the bunk and took a breath and began her circuit. 14 steps by 8 steps. She was in better shape than she had been on Day 1. The daily circuit had seen to that, and her Varic vocabulary was at 461 words, which was progress, though not quite where she wanted it to be. She had spent the 2 days since the operation thinking about what had worked and what could be refined. The grief ritual phrase had worked very well. She had been uncertain about it. She had been saving it for the right moment across 41 days, and when the moment had come she had recognized it and the phrase had landed the way she had believed it would, which was satisfying in the specific way that a thing you have prepared for a long time is satisfying when it does what it was built to do. The youngest one, the one with the notepad, had been the most interesting to work with. She had recognized him from the first second, the way you recognize a specific kind of attention in a person, the kind that is not performed and not strategic but just constitutionally present. He listened the way she listened, deeply and continuously, and reaching him had required being accurate rather than clever, which was always more demanding and always more worth it. She wondered if he had kept the word. She thought he probably had. At what she estimated was hour 4 of Day 49, she heard something different in the corridor. Not the usual 2-person footstep pattern of the shift change. More. She sat on the bunk and rolled the bolt between her fingers and listened to the corridor fill with the sound of armored feet, and she counted the resonances the way she had been counting them for 49 days, and the count rose past 10 and past 20 and kept climbing, and she sat very still and did the math. She set the bolt down on the bunk. She stood up. The door opened. 50 soldiers filled the doorway and the corridor beyond it, dark armor and polished surfaces, a wall of them, and at the front of the formation, slightly to the left, the youngest one, a different youngest one this time, had a notepad. She looked at the 50 soldiers standing in her doorway. She looked at the notepad. She looked at the formation, how it was arranged, where the weight was distributed, which 2 at the front were holding the eye contact rule and which ones further back had already glanced at her face despite the briefing that told them not to, and she noted which shoulder the 3rd soldier from the left was protecting and which one in the 2nd row was standing slightly ahead of the others because that was a habit and habits were information. She said, in Varric Standard, with 461 words and 49 days and one very specific set of lessons behind her. They are learning. She let that land. The front row held. She looked at the young one with the notepad, really looked, the way she had looked at Velsarin 2 days ago, finding the person behind the position, and she saw what she needed to see. She smiled. Not because 50 was better odds than 5. Because 50 had just walked into her classroom and not one of them knew it yet. She took a breath. She began to speak.